Hey, and welcome back to the number one podcast in the world, the Cellarcast, episode 119. I'm recording this a little bit late, because my sleep schedule's been really out of whack. I woke up at like 11 today. I don't like waking up so late, you know? But I don't know. I don't even know how I got to this point. You know what it was? It's okay. I've been sick the last week. I went over to Kat's and she thought she had allergies. She had a cold and she passed it to me last week. And I've been dealing with that, which is partially why there was a delay with the next video. It's also just a really long video. So, I'm kind of like, I'm not like entirely better. I sort of didn't want to record yesterday because I still had a cough. I'm like, this has to be the last day, right? This has got to be the last day. I thought I got sick because of the bus. Let me tell you about the smelliest bus ride I've taken in a while. I get on. It's one of those things where I stepped onto the bus and I felt the humidity level rise a couple notches. You know that? You're like, oh no, oh god, it's one of these. And it was before we got what they call an Indian summer in California, where like randomly right before winter, it just gets really hot for like a week. I'm not sure exactly. I'm sure it's some kind of ocean currents thing, but that's how our weather works. So this was before that. It was actually a little chilly, and I step onto the bus. Oh no, it feels like a wetland in here. The first thing I notice is I get hit with the stench. After the humidity is the stench of like, there's a couple homeless people in the front and they reek of urine, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess I gotta go deeper. I gotta clear the smell. And no matter how far I went in the bus, there was a different awful smell. There was just, it was just the most freakish bus ride in terms of like an olfactory experience I've had in a really long time. So eventually I just sat down in like it smelled like waste. It smelled like human waste. And there was this woman in front of me, and I remember she was having a conversation on the phone over like a text messenger, but for some reason, it seemed like she was having an argument with her partner. The only way they could communicate was via voice memos. So you're essentially just hearing a phone conversation, but in like the most infuriating, inefficient way possible. They couldn't just fucking call each other. They just sent voice memos back and forth on this loud ass bus. You want to hear my pet political issue? You want to hear a thing that I'm legitimately like, this is like a thing that I would vote for? I think public transportation should be free. I think public transit should be taxed. Well, it's free with an asterisk. I think it should be like tax subsidized. I'm sure it is to some extent, but I don't think I should pay to take the bus. Honestly, with the shit that I go through, they should be paying me. Well, let me explain my reasoning, right? So I take public transportation a lot, and I just started thinking about it, and I was like, it's kind of weird that we have a public police department, we have a public fire department, we have public schooling, we have public waste management, we have public libraries, we have all of these institutions, right, that are tax funded. That like you don't pay the fire department to come to your house to put out a fire. But for some reason, transportation is the only public institution that gets run like a private corporation for some weird reason. Why is that? Maybe I could look up some history as to where that started, but wherever it started, it should have stopped because it's dumb. It doesn't make sense to me. Because, like, if you think about it, okay, if you don't have a kid, or a child wouldn't be paying taxes. If you don't have a child who's school aged, you still have to pay taxes that go towards public schools, theoretically. I know we all know it gets moved around in weird ways, but theoretically, you're still paying to fund public schooling. You're still paying to fund a fire department or a police department. And I think most people in general are okay with that, despite the fact that, like, you know, how many times are you going to call the fire department in your life, or the police department? Hopefully, like, never, right? But maybe once, maybe twice, you know? But we still pay, we use these institutions very infrequently. Like, the regular person will maybe, like, across all people, they'll have some business, they'll have some regular work to do, right? But, like, an individual is only going to be using that a handful of times at most in their life. Hopefully, right? Same thing with schools. Like, there's maybe, if your kid goes through, like, the entire school system public, that's 12 years. Which, I mean, that's, like, a fair amount of time to, like, pay for something. But, like, if you don't have a kid, you don't get anything out of that personally, right? But most people are still, like, okay with paying for that because they recognize that it's like a social system and you pay into it, and the community all pays into something and they get something out of it. But for some reason, public transportation is treated differently, despite the fact that it's way more applicable to most people's lives. Like, everyone can use public transit, and probably does at some point. Even if you, like, have a car, you might take it every now and again, depending on who you are or something like that, right? Like, if you're a student, you'll be taking the bus or the train. Like, that's pretty common. If you have, like, work. So I live in California, right? This is very applicable. California in the Bay Area, one of the most annoying things about it is that I remember, I think you get really used to, like, when you live, like, when I used to live as a kid in the Chicagoland area, you get really used to things just kind of all being within at like maximum 30 minutes of each other. Like, any place where there's actual stuff, it's all pretty concentrated in a relatively small area. You don't have to go that far. It's like, what, 20 minutes? 20 minutes by bike type of thing, right? In the Bay Area, stuff's super spread out. Like, if you have friends, for instance, or you go to school or you go to work, you might have work. I have a friend who has work that's like 5 cities away, and he has to be there at 6 a.m. Like, it's fucking spread out. Stuff is not concentrated here. And so if you don't have a car, being entirely bike is, you gotta be in pretty good shape, man. Like, and we have weather that, like, permits biking most of the year, at least. But, like, stuff is spread out. If you live in, like, the real Bay Area, you live, like, a little, like, in this middle, just sort of like fuck area. I don't know how else to describe it. And you have a job in, like, San Francisco, and you're not going to pay San Francisco prices, right? You have to take the train in. I don't know how many people realize this. The only way, if you don't live in San Francisco, like, the only way to get there is through, like, on the highway or the freeway. I forgot the difference. Or taking the train. It's there's, like, a barrier. You can't bike from outside of the city to the city. So public transportation is so much more present in people's lives, right? But for some reason, it's, like, treated like a taxi service, like a private company. And I don't get it. I think, maybe I'm naive, right? I think that if you took the relative operating costs of the bus system or the train system, and then you spread that across the entire population, because not everyone's going to be taking the train, not everyone's going to be taking the bus, not everyone's going to be taking the BART, which we have up here, which is like the rail transit system, which I wish extended way further. It would be awesome, because I actually like the BART, but it's like confined to this very narrow area way north of the peninsula. It was annoying as fuck. I wish it went down. Oh my god, there was plans to have the BART go all the way from San Francisco to like LA, which would have been fucking awesome. It would have been sick. You could have made that trip in probably half a day, maybe. It's pretty fast, and I like the BART a lot. And then it got shut down because all those stupid like county politics and the fucking Caltrain people were like, it's our thing. Just some stupid shit that made life worse. Well, it made it less good for the actual citizens of this state. Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, if you just like spread it across the average operating costs of those things across like the entire population, because not everyone takes those things, not everyone takes public transportation, which is perfectly reasonable, right? I feel like it would probably be cheaper overall if you just spread it across. And like, yeah, it's another tax, which is like pretty hard to sell to people, and I get like California has fucking like really high tax rates on everything, but at the same time, it's like in principle it makes sense to me. In principle it makes sense. It's probably never going to happen because of like actual business interests that have coupled up to our transportation system that are not going to be happy if people aren't constantly paying into it, which sucks. This is why imperialism is awesome. See, everyone always talks about how bad it is. Imagine if I just conquered the entirety of California, and then I was king, and I could make this one change that I would want at the cost of thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps, lives. That's why imperialism rules, because you get to show up and you get to tell people what's what, and you're the smartest guy in the world. That's my little pet political issue. Not the imperialism thing, the public transit thing. I'm sure someone's going to be like, there's a bunch of problems with that. Yeah, I know. I'm not a politician. And also, this is one thing, like, people are like, you should vote on stuff. I have never, ever seen this position held by anyone ever. I think I came up with it myself. This was something I came up with myself. There is no one in any form of local or state government who has this platform, and I feel like I would be the one guy championing it. I would be the one person. Who do I vote for? No one. No one's gonna do this for me. So I guess I have to run for public office. I'm gonna be like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Because I'm a beloved, incredibly fit, muscular person and entertainer, and then I'm going to be the governor of California. Hey, there was that, hey, a quick side note, that emergency alert thing that went out if you live in the US. If you don't live in the US, you might have heard about this, but there's a test of our national alert system, which a lot of people were really freaked out about, like, the prospect of, but, I mean, we do it with, like, everything else. Television, on radio, on, a lot of stuff, there's national, like, we have the national alert system. Extending it to phones actually makes a lot of sense, and I'm sort of surprised we hadn't done it earlier. Remember how, it was around my time zone that was like 11 that it went off, I want to say, or 2, It was like 2 p.m., something like that, and this was it was later into the afternoon, and this was like when I was in my sicko mode, quite literally, where I was, I felt bad. I felt like kind of trashy. I haven't been sick in a really long time, right? I haven't had a head cold in a while. So I just kind of went into that, like, I wake up from my sleep and then I go back to sleep, and I'm going to sleep for like another 5 hours because my body feels like shit right now. And I got woken up by that alert. And let me tell you, getting woken up and by like a loud, aggressive sound, and the first thing you see that your brain actually registers is a big yellow, like, warning triangle thing symbol with the text "National Alert." Dude, there was a moment, like, within about 2 or 3 seconds, I read the text that it was like a test, and I remembered that, oh yeah, I remember hearing about there was going to be a test. But for those first like 5 seconds, probably less, it was an extremely short, intense amount of time. You ever seen those videos where someone like jump scares their grandma and you see her soul slip out of her body a little bit before it goes back in? I empathized with that grandma in that moment. That was... I had like a... Oh my fucking god, it's happening. There's a crazy moment where your brain has to accept that, like, you're gonna die, that, like, it's gonna happen. I remember having this sometimes when I was playing League of Legends and I made a really bad positioning error, and you're like freaked out trying to get out of the situation, and then you're like, there's a moment where you're like, I just gotta accept this. And that's an interesting experience. Like, at some point, at some point you're like, fuck, all right, okay. And you just have no bones about it. And you're like, well, I can't do anything. And going through that, the instant after waking up, only to have, like, and then to have it be completely dissuaded in a matter of seconds was very interesting. That was a unique experience. Excuse me. Why did I burp so much? I'm gonna get into some actual stuff that I went through this week. I don't know if I'll really... Excuse me. Didn't really play any new games this week. Partially because my entire day has been taken up by working on this video, and then I've been trying to write every day, which has been fun, which I've had a very good time at. And I've been trying to work on a story, and so I've been playing a lot of Titanfall 2. I could say that. God, that game is good. Wow, it's really good. But we did watch a couple things last time that I was over at Kat's house. We got a lot of stuff done, actually. We burned through a lot of material. The first thing is that we finished Castlevania Nocturne. And I would... So I would like to finish my thoughts on that. And now I touched on the first 4 episodes last week, but I think it's a different show once you've seen the whole thing. So how did I feel about it overall? I remember leaving off on the 4th episode and being interested, intrigued at where it was going to go. And after finishing it, I can say that... So Nocturne is 8 episodes, roughly 20 minutes. The first season of the original Castlevania show was 4 episodes at around 40 minutes. They were pretty long, which, with math, evens out to basically around the same runtime in terms of, between the first season of each thing, because they already confirmed there's going to be a second season of Nocturne. Now, comparing the two of them, which I think is fair because Nocturne is really a sequel to the original, Nocturne is not as good as that first season of Castlevania, which is strange because in a lot of ways Nocturne feels like a more... How do I describe this? It feels like a lot more stuff happens. It feels like a much fuller show, but it kind of... how do I describe this? Nocturne lacks a very substantial core to it. And that really is the problem, is that it ends up I've heard some people describe it as being unfocused, and I think that's fair. So the primary problem with Castlevania Nocturne that we both felt, is that the show doesn't really have like an emotional center that feels it doesn't have like the right emotional center. This can all be boiled down to the fact that Richter feels like a side character in his own show, and it's really strange because the show, like Annette feels like the main character of the show. She feels like the main character. She gets significantly more time devoted to her backstory. She gets significantly more plot lines and characters devoted to her backstory. Large chunks of the story throughout the show are dedicated to her plotline, which is pretty disconnected from Maria or Richter's. And she has the most stuff going on, and she's kind of the most interesting character because of that, which is kind of a problem because after a certain point, it feels like the show goes, oh, fuck, this is a show about Richter. This is about Richter. I forgot about that. I was trying to think about... There's this really weird moment where after that fourth episode, Richter runs off. He gets really spooked. He meets his grandfather, who was like... There's a lot of just weirdnesses in the writing that, like, don't bring it down. It's just sort of like these little nicks here and there. His grandfather, this other Belmont, who he's never known his entire life, and he's like, how did you find me? Which is confusing because Richter's gone like one town north. I get that it's like, Europe in the French Revolution era, and it was pretty common for people to just never leave, like, stick within the 20-mile radius in which you were born. But Richter's like a young kind of adventurer, is sort of what it, like he's a revolution. He feels like he's the type of character who would be getting around and at least visiting other places. Are you telling me that he and Maria have been doing this whole revolutionary thing and they've never gone one town north? They've never, like, had any reason to talk to anyone else? A little weird. But he has this whole thing with his grandfather, and the main hang-up that he's got in this is that he feels cheated by the fact that he had this family that he never knew about who never talked to him. You're like, okay, which kind of falls in line with some other stuff that you've seen of him before. Like, okay, his mom died, he doesn't feel like he has any family. His, Maria and her mom Tara are kind of like his found family. They've kind of taken him in. They're like a little unit, right? And finding his grandfather, feels a little bit betrayed. And then learning that Tara also hid the truth from him. And it's like, okay, this is like a character thing. There's like a little sense of belonging kind of, thrown into question. Just smack my pop filter again. And then there's like an attack. There's an action sequence. And Richter has this like absolutely absurd anime power-up scene. And he's like, my whole problem is that I never made a decision in my life, and now I'm a Belmont, and I'm just watching this. I'm like, what? Who the fuck is this guy? Who? This feels like we missed like a season's worth of character development and like establishment. It's super bizarre, and from that point on, it like becomes, the show tries to act like it's about Richter. They just like really, really rush through this character development, and it's bizarre. I feel like they needed like another episode of focusing on actually depicting the problems in Richter's like personal emotional life. Like, I can see the logical through line between not having a connection to your family and having identity issues with like who you want to be in the world, but like they do not do the groundwork to establish that. It is really flimsy, and it feels really rushed when it happens. Like, it feels like they're starting to get there when he's talking to his grandfather, like Juste, I think is his name. And, you know, it's like, okay, you're sort of starting to see, so, but like there's just not enough time spent on it. It's really, really weird. And it feels like I don't know, it feels, I want to identify that as a problem. I think that's a problem. That the main character feels especially weak and uninteresting. I was trying to think of things that Richter had done in the show before that scene, and I genuinely couldn't think of any. It like, he's there, he's around, and he's like in the scenes, and he's there, and he fights the vampires, and he talks to people. But in terms of actually like, okay, this thing, we're learning about this thing about him. We are developing this thing about him. We're revealing this. He's doing a thing in the plot, like on his own. He's taking some kind of agency. God forbid your protagonist takes some kind of agency in the story. He just gets fucking pushed around by Maria and Annette all the time. Where's it going? That cough just threw me off. And I was trying to think, and it's legitimately like his mom dies when he's a kid, and then he grows up, and then he meets his grandfather in episode 7. Or wherever. When does that happen? I had the IMDb up. Where's this goddamn I had to look at like the episode guide to find out. Like, I'm pretty sure he runs away in episode 4. I'm pretty sure it's pretty sure it's like 5. Yeah, 5. 6 is where he has just like a scene talking to his grandfather. And then I think by the end of that, he has this big scene. And then it's like literally episode 6 of 8. The end of it, they realize that it's a show about him. Literally, like the first episodes 2, 3, 4, 5 are barely about Richter. It's really weird. It's super strange, to restate myself. And that's the odd thing, right? Is that I think Richter is the weakest part, and he's the main character of the show. At the same time, I kind of like a lot of the other stuff. It's like forgive me, I'm going to make like a food comparison. I know it's very trite, but bear with me. It's like a Danish with no jam, you know? You're like eating this pastry, and it's just pastry. There's no fruit jam filling or anything, or cream cheese. Ooh, the Danish with the cream cheese, that stuff's so good, dude. And it's the show, like, this is a pretty good pastry, kind of like croissant-y bread. You know, I like Annette. I think Maria, her vocal performance is weak, in my opinion, for the most part, but I think her character development's pretty neat. There's a twist, the twist where it's like, oh, the priest is her father. I thought that was interesting. I thought that added an interesting dynamic to all of the characters. Like there was some added emotional stakes that, you know, the things that he was doing had a much more personal bite to them, especially for Maria as someone who kind of detests institutions, like religious institutions and the government, which at this point I would assume are probably somewhat, probably more connected than modern day France. So like her being like, wow, that causes me a lot of ethical concerns and makes me see this character in a new light. I thought that was kind of neat. I like how the priest, it like his plan doesn't really make sense. You sort of get the sense that he isn't like fully in control. He doesn't feel like he's fully in control of what's happening. He it's almost like he himself doesn't, his whole reasoning is like, oh, the vampire savior is gonna Jeddah from Darkstalkers is going to protect the interests of the church, which is complete nonsense. But I kind of got the impression that it was almost like this sort of fear, like he himself, his own faith had wavered at that point. So when you find out that like, oh, he had this like affair with this woman and had like a secret child, it's like you can sort of, I see, like I could see the seeds of this character eventually down the line, like later on in his life from that point, having hang-ups or having second thoughts about the resiliency of his faith, right? And it's kind of like he's scared, like he doesn't, like he's gonna fucking die if he challenges these damn vampires, you know? So he just kind of has to like work with them, and it's like he's backwards rationalized it, which I thought was like kind of fine. I thought that was neat. Let's see, other stuff. I really like a lot of the other characters. I like Olrox. I think his vocal performance is really interesting. I wouldn't have expected him to have such like a deep, raspy, hoarse voice, right? That's horse with an A. Okay? He's not going, no, no. The delivery of his stuff, like, it was weird at first, the way that his the performance, but it really grew on me, and I kind of just liked him being in scenes. I liked him acting. I liked, while, like, listening, I was curious about what Olrox had to say about things, and I enjoyed his position as sort of, like, a vaguely he isn't really villainous. I guess he sort of is, like, because he killed Richter's mom. But I liked his place in the story as a bit of a neutral member of the of the vampire faction, which I'm trying to think of examples. I guess like Alucard in the original, but he didn't have much of an association with the vampires like Carmilla and such. Olrox is like in the thick of it, and he has these political relationships with them, but he's kind of standoffish, and he's sort of a maverick. And I thought that was interesting. He doesn't really do anything, which was a bummer. I wish he was more active in the plot, but when he was on screen, I enjoyed it. His relationship, like, I really liked the scene. I thought it was interesting, like when he has that scene with, what's the guy's name? Gay boy priest. He's got some odd Mizrock? Yeah, Mizrock is his name. And he's talking about, they're just having this conversation in this room, their little gay boy room, and he's telling him about how he was involved in like the Revolutionary War in America, and I think Olrox is supposed. He has a weird name. I think Olrox is just like a fantasy name, but I think he might be implied to be like Native American or something. I'm not sure. It could be. That could be just like totally conjecture, but I mean, he has like dark skin and like really long straight hair, black straight hair, and he sort of has like these like native features. It could just be a coincidence, but he was telling him about how he had this. He was on the side of the revolutionaries in the American Revolution, and then his lover he turned into a vampire, was killed by a vampire hunter. And Mizrach is like, well, you have to understand, like, you turn him into a vampire. And he kind of accuses him of being greedy. Like, you knew that was going to happen to him, that would create that kind of danger for him. And Olrox is like, just, he justifies it with the idea that he was in love with him. And that was, like, in his mind, he should have been allowed to have done that. And it's kind of interesting. I feel like he's an interesting character, and you sort of see the ways that he still might have, he still has like a soft spot, or at one point in time he sympathized with revolutionary ideas, and then he became very jaded to the human world. And now he's sort of like in this sort of emotionally detached state. Like when Mizrach says, like, why haven't you turned me into a vampire? And he just says, I don't love you. I was like, oh shit. And you wonder, like, okay, how much of that is true and how much of that is just his sort of coping mechanism and his inability to get attached to someone because of what happened previously. And like, has he not turned him into a vampire? There's like multiple ways that you can read that statement. Does he not love him just because he doesn't actually love him? Does he not love him because he won't let himself get attached? Has he not turned him into a vampire because he actually loves him and he doesn't want that to happen again? Like he learned his lesson? Like there's a lot of interesting stuff I thought you could read into his character, and then he just doesn't do anything, which is unfortunate. He helps the main characters out a little bit, but it's sort of indirect, right? He's sort of forced into a position by the plot where he can't do that much because he kind of has to maintain an alliance at the moment with Erzabet the Battery, the onion lady. I was gonna think about something, and then I forgot about it. But something to do with the character. Oh yeah, I think. Okay. I know that like okay. No, hang on. Let me go back on that. I was gonna say that I think this season ending on a cliffhanger was hurt it. Excuse me, because like that burp again. Okay, it's not crazy for an animated series to get a second season announced. It's very common, especially Netflix loves doing that. Well, they love canceling stuff, apparently. But, like, in animation, the thing is that, like, it's a very common marketing thing to go, oh my god, we're 5 episodes in, and we're gonna be renewed for a second season. It's like a marketing thing. Really, the second season was basically a given, because animation takes so long to do that when most, what would you call it? I was gonna say, not studio, but like either network or, whoever's paying for it, right? Whoever's funding it, whoever's going to buy the show, the production studio, I guess would be the most accurate thing, in this case Netflix. When they sign on for one season, they're really signing on for two. It might even be part of like the agreement, because animation takes so long that if you actually wait the whole process through for it to be animated, marketed, then released, and the show is successful, you want to be able to capitalize on that within a reasonable amount of time, right? You don't want to be like, okay, we're going to have a year between seasons where a lot of the hype is going to die down. You want to, like, within, hopefully like 6 to 8 months, maybe. I don't know when the next season's going to be coming out, but like, you want to be able to strike while the iron is hot. So really, when a production studio takes on an animated series, the assumption is that they're buying a two season deal, right? However long a season might be, they're going to buy a 2-season deal, with the assumption that, if the first season doesn't do that well, then there's a second season. Who knows? That's like the cost that they're taking on. So I am pretty confident that when they signed this show, that they were gonna, they knew they were gonna do a second season, and that's what the original one did as well. The original ended on a big cliffhanger. Actually, funny enough, both revealing Alucard. I just realized that Alucard shows up in the last 10 seconds of this show, and it's kind of cool. And we went, oh, it's Alucard. I like Alucard from the last show. He's going to be back. That's cool. I guess we're building up to that Symphony of the Night series, which they have to do at some point, right? Like, they have to do Symphony of the Night. And the difference is that the original series, the original season of that first series, felt almost like a pilot, like a proof of concept almost. It's a very tight, controlled story. And again, it's basically the same runtime. It's effectively the same runtime. But in that first season of the original Netflix Castlevania, not a lot of characters. You've got Trevor, Sypha, who only really is in the show like halfway through, about, I think maybe even later. Halfway through, I think is fair. I think that's when that happens. She's only in there like halfway through. There's like the leader of the speakers. There's like some very minor characters who are just there to be someone else for Trevor to talk to. There's like the priest, who's like the main villain. And then there's Dracula, isn't even really in the show. He's there as like a setup in the intro, but he doesn't factor into the show until like season 3? No, sorry, season 2. Excuse me. I was thinking of season 4 when he gets resurrected. But he doesn't really come in until season 2. It's a very focused show, and it's the primary concern of that season was establishing the setting and selling you on Trevor as a character. And I think about the first scene with Trevor where he's in the pub, and you kind of understand everything you need to know about him in that first scene, and then it's just reinforced and developed out, like fleshed out throughout the rest of the season. He's like, the world is fucked. There's roving bands of monsters around the countryside killing people. Trevor is this dejected guy who's been cast out of society because of his family name. He tries to hide it, but he's the only one who's actually empowered to put a stop to things, who could change things. And the season, you're seeing him go from this sort of like total deadbeat to beginning to feel a little bit of motivation and drive to kind of like get back to your, and he doesn't completely change by the end of the season, which is like a difference that I feel with like between this and like what they did with Richter. Trevor, by the end of those 4 episodes, is not like, he hasn't had some crazy speech, like emotional speech, but you've seen the needle move a little bit on him, where he takes some action. He goes to, fight some monsters. He ends up saving Sypha indirectly, unintentionally. And then by the end, I kind of got the impression, that Trevor sort of saw a little bit of himself in the speakers, right? There's like this implication that, they're they have these nomadic lifestyles, and they're both kind of empowered to be able to fight against the monsters. But Trevor sees that like the speakers they're too meek and they're too pacifistic to do anything or to stand up for themselves. Excuse me. And it's almost like that kind of spurs his own, like, that's his he's seeing his reflection a little bit. And like, oh, it's kind of interesting. And by the end, I was like pretty interested in his character. Sypha gets more time later on, but she's like, she's fun. You like her. And then the hook with Alucard is like, oh shit, it's Alucard, and who's this vampire dude? I mean, I already know who Alucard is, but who's this vampire guy? With Nocturne, I feel like, I don't know, I was very surprised by that first Castlevania season, because it doesn't feel like a typical season of a TV show, if that makes sense, where we're going to establish a bunch of characters and stuff, and I'm trying to think of a word for it, but it was very reserved. Maybe not reserved, maybe that's not the right word. It wasn't focused, I think, is a good word for it, but also, controlled. It felt very controlled, and maybe reserved is the right word. Whereas Nocturne feels a lot more like a typical kind of like TV show, if that makes sense. We're going to establish a lot of characters and all these plot lines and all this stuff, and we're going to just slam a bunch of stuff in to get you invested in like a long-term thing. And I think along the way, it sort of loses the core of the story to the point where, I mean, I guess we'll watch the second season to see where it goes, but to be honest, I'm not that interested. I was much more interested in seeing the rest of the original, but I'm not, like, I don't know where the characters are gonna go. Annette kind of got all of her stuff done in this season. You got her backstory established. She killed the slave owner. That's him. That's who he was. She killed her previous like slave master. Richter had his sudden, I'm gonna be a character, I guess, now thing. Maria has like something to do because her mom gets hit with the crazy juice by the end of the season. Olrox, I want to see him do anything. Mizrock is there. I like Alucard. I'd like to watch Alucard do stuff. God, I hope he has another. I hope he has another sloppy double blowjob from two bisexual Japanese twins. Remember when that happened? That was awesome. But yeah, I would say overall a weaker story than the original. And I'm back. I just went and ate some food because I was hungry. Anyway, will that slow me down or speed me up? I don't know. I might get slowed down talking about Disney's Dinosaurs from, what year was this stupid thing? 2000. So Kat said she had another idea for a marathon, because I am but a leaf in the wind to her whims. And she said, but because the Nickelodeon marathon, it's we don't have that many movies left, honestly, and most of them are bad. So she had an idea for another one, and it's a lot more specific. That is, she wanted to watch all of the movies from the weird Disney era, from like I'd say the recent weird era. That being, she said this was inspired by Atlantis, our viewing of Atlantis. The period from around like 1999 to 2009, like roughly the first I guess really 2000 to 2009, like the first decade of the new millennium, where it's like this odd time period for Disney, because for like Disney animated films, I mean, because they bought Pixar, and Pixar had a couple movies out at that point, and it was almost like you could feel Disney prioritize being like, okay, Pixar is the new animation studio. There was like whenever you look at the joint product from that period, pretty much all the notable ones are Pixar productions. The Disney ones tend to be sort of forgotten and weird. And we're just going to do it in chronological order. And thankfully, looking at the list, I think most of them are actually pretty okay. There's probably some good ones in that. Treasure Planet's in there. So I'm going to be a happy camper. But we unfortunately had to start off with the one that we were sort of dreading, which was Dinosaurs. This was the 2000 CG live-action hybrid dinosaur movie that they put out. Let's see. What is there to say about Dinosaurs? It's not good. Okay, so this movie was originally going to be, I was reading the IMDb trivia, one of the simple pleasures of life, for this film, and it was originally going to actually be, when the movie was greenlit, it was going to be entirely stop motion. It was going to be stop motion with a couple live action elements in the forms of, like, I think a couple people in like monkey suits, which probably would have still been weird. The reason that they pivoted to being a CG movie was because I believe Jurassic Park came out. Yes, hang on. Under Disney, maybe I should look up like the Wikipedia for this. It was something like that, like there was some weird pivot where at some point they decided, no, the dinosaurs must be CG. Dinosaurs 2000. Let's heat this baby up. 2000 film. I want to read about the production. Let's see. So Yeah, so it was inspired by the short by Phil Tippett, who you might know from the recent Mad God? Yeah, Mad God. The short he made in 1984 called Prehistoric Beast, which is about like dinosaurs and stuff. Tippett's skill at creating what is Go Motion? It's a variety of stop motion animation which incorporates motion blur into each frame involving motion. Interesting. Led to the 1985 CBS animated documentary Dinosaur. A year later, Tippett was hired to do work on the special. Let's see. In 19. Oh God. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. Here it is. The thing that ultimately, this is a quote from Smith, someone involved with the production. The thing that ultimately killed it is that Disney knew that Jurassic Park was coming along pretty well, and they knew it was being done digitally. They figured, well, maybe we should wait until we can do it digitally. Yeah. So if you don't know anything about this movie, it is the choice to make all CG dinosaurs, I think, single-handedly tanks the film. I don't know if it tanked it at the time, but in retrospect, from a modern perspective, absolutely. And here's the thing. When you compare the dinosaurs to other CG effects at the time, CG creatures and stuff, I honestly don't think they look that bad. I don't think, in comparison, it's super noticeable. Well, no, sorry, I shouldn't say noticeable. It's like not good. This is Disney, you know. It's relatively state-of-the-art technology. The problem is that the dinosaurs are placed in entirely live-action environments. Maybe there's a little bit of CG going on for the environments, but they are like essentially green screened into real footage. Okay, so when you play like a video game, right, you play Tomb Raider on the PlayStation 1, the original, and the game has like 5 polygons, and Lara Croft's boobs are made of paper. They look like obelisks. You notice it a little bit, but very quickly your brain kind of smooths it over. Maybe a better comparison would be a show like Reboot, an entirely CG show from, I don't know, around the same time period. And Reboot looks significantly worse. It looks it's a TV budget, right? It's a TV budget kids show, right? So you'd expect that the animation, the quality of the models and all that, it doesn't look nearly as high fidelity, but I think art style wise, it works so much better because it feels cohesive. You watch Reboot and you can acknowledge that, okay, yeah, this is extremely primitive CG, but because the whole show is that style, it doesn't, after a certain point, it feels less like a technological restriction and more like that's just the art style. And I think in recent times, you've seen games, for instance, that go back to more to retro styles. Pixel art at first was really big. That, oh hey, pixel art actually has a lot of interesting merits. Now you're seeing a lot of like low poly type of games that are more stylized, that sometimes intend to look like something off of the PlayStation 1 or the N64 or something like that. And that's a style now because that has an aesthetic. And when the whole thing is like that and you commit to that art style, you can create a certain kind of mood, right? A certain tone, a feel to your game. You look at something like Cruelty Squad or Dusk. Dinosaurs it is constantly reminding you of how bad the CGI looks, because your brain, like at every single second of the film, your brain has a comparison point to what real life looks like, and the dinosaurs are in it, and it's not working. It's not working, and I would say it's probably worse than the like prequels. I watched a really interesting video the other day. I'd recommend it. It's called "Why Does Attack of the Clones Look Like a Video Game?" And it's from this channel called, oh god, what, it's like something like the Empire something like that. The Empire, Crushing the Empire, or something like that. And it's this dude who is an actual visual effects professional who's worked in the industry for a number of years. And he's breaking down from a historical, technological, a lot of different senses, a creative standpoint, why Star Wars Attack of the Clones feels weird when you watch it, like visually, like why, even at the time. And the complaint or the comment people would make about it was that it feels like a video game. And his thing is, well, I mean, if you look at video games around that time, or other CG things, it doesn't really look like a video game. That's just the best way that people can describe. There's actually a bunch of it's a great video. There's actually a bunch of very nitty gritty little technical details in the way that the film was made that like you don't notice, but your brain did. It's literally the Plinkett joke, like the Plinkett meme. You don't notice it, but your brain did. Like the weird little ways that CG shadows work, the slight differences between CGI cloth versus actual cloth. The way a fully CG character's skin looks a little different, and the certain little details in the way that they move that are slightly mechanical, and when you have it up to real people, it becomes very noticeable. A really interesting video. I'd recommend it. It's called "Why Does Attack of the Clones Look Like a Video Game?" And Dinosaurs is really similar to that, except that's like the entire movie. With Attack of the Clones, it's like you can joke about how the whole movie's filmed on like a blue screen or whatever. I mean, like a lot of it is, but most of it is like real characters, like real people on set and stuff like that. Dinosaur is asking you to believe. It's asking you to feel like there's any kind of weight to characters who are obviously fake and like noticeably fake, and it really takes me out. There's like not a single moment of the entire film where I can actually get invested and believe in the world because of that decision. There's some really bad shots, like there's a scene early on where one of the lemur characters makes this, and the lemurs look horrific. They look really, because they have supposed to have skin. The dinosaurs fare a little bit better because they're scaly, but the lemurs having skin and fur, there's a moment where one of them makes this, just makes this like wide-eyed expression, and like my womb dried up, dude. Like I felt myself becoming less fertile. It killed my boivaries. It looks so bad. And it's frustrating to me because dinosaurs are so cool. Dinosaurs are such a cool thing, right? And I feel like I have this want, this desire in my head for a dinosaur film that's like the first half of WALL-E. The first half of WALL-E is there's no dialogue, everything's told visually. It's this, not super out of the box, but interesting little story. Like, you totally get it. It's a very engrossing first half. I think the second half of WALL-E's fine. It's just, I really like the first. It feels like a really good short film that gets like extended. That gets extended to like feature length. I want a movie like that, but with dinosaurs. I think that would be so cool. Like, it would be awesome. And to have just a dialogue-free film with dinosaurs, where you're telling a story visually with these animals. Doesn't Bambi do kind of a similar thing, I guess? I haven't seen Bambi in probably over a decade at this point. And it turns out that apparently that original vision for the script was that it was going to be kind of like that. It was going to be stop motion, and it was going to have no dialogue. And then I think Bob Iger was like, no, hang on. Was it Michael Eisner? Yes, it was Michael Eisner. Sorry. However, at his insistence, it was decided early on that the dinosaurs would talk during the film. To accommodate this change, Aladar, who's the main character, would be given lips in contrast to actual iguanodons who were duck-billed. That's so funny. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, and man, this movie it's just boring. It's just boring. The premise is, so that's the thing, is like, even if, that's like the tough bit, right? Even if it had that vision of being a fully stop motion movie with no dialogue, maybe it would have been better. Maybe it would have been more interesting. But at the end of the day, it's just not an interesting film. The directing is extremely boring and flavorless. There's like one interesting sequence early on in the movie where the meteor hits, and that kicks off them having to fight. It's like every dinosaur movie. I feel like every Land Before Time or all that crap. It's always, we have to find a new home. Because, I don't know, I guess it's hard to tell stories about motivated animals. But, yeah, that's the premise. Which could be interesting. You can do that in an interesting way. It's just that this movie does it in the most formulaic, boring way. But anyway, there's the sequence with the meteor hitting the Earth. And there's a couple shots, because it happens at night. And there's just these shots where it starts, like the entire world gets lit up as if it's daylight, and then it flashes. It's like a flash, and then it's night again. And I thought visually that was kind of cool. Like when something really big lights up in the sky, and it's like daytime for a second. You ever seen like huge fireworks or videos of like explosions, like factory explosions, like chemical factory explosions kind of thing? Excuse me. That's like neat. I don't know. It was just an interesting visual, and there's nothing that interesting in the rest of the film. It's literally like 5 or 6 seconds. It's so weird. It's like he's like Dinosaur Moses a little bit. It's this egg that gets drifted away, and then it from its original nest home then gets this dinosaur who gets raised by lemurs, and then the meteor hits and they have to find a new home, and they find this herd of other dinosaurs, and there's the leader, and the leader is like stodgy and stuck in his ways, and there's like we need a scary dinosaur to be the villain, so we're gonna have a Carnotaur, which is a cool looking dinosaur with like the devil horns and shit. There's a weird aspect to where when the Carnotaur finally shows up and it's like a problem and the characters have to face him or it or whatever, there's two of them. They don't speak, which is really strange. I was reading that apparently the decision to make the Carnotaurs silent was because it would be quote-unquote too creepy to have an entire movie of these characters being stalked by this thing. Or it's like kind of looming in the background that the Carnotaur is trying to find them. And then to suddenly have that character speak. And that's like stupid because that's like interesting. That would actually be... That's kind of a cool idea, to have a character stalking someone else an entire film and then finally hearing their voice at the end. That's kind of like actually a compelling idea that might make you emotionally invested in what's happening. No, we can't have that. So the Carnotaurs are evil, so they don't get to speak. The Carnotaurs are... It's so weird because they're all animals, but the Carnotaurs are the only ones who are treated like animals, where they're just acting on instinct to eat and all that, and they without any kind of complex internal logic like the main character dinosaurs have. I don't know. We were so uninvested in this movie. I think we just started making food in the middle of it and not paying attention. It's a stinker. How is this thing received? Filming accident. Oh yeah, someone died during this because a camera boom hit a power line while they were filming. Company was later fined $5,000 for violating worker safety laws. Dude, imagine dying for fucking Dinosaur. Imagine. Christ. I feel so bad for that guy. Let's see. Reception. I guess it performed pretty well at the box office. The film holds an approval rating of 65%. Well, Roger Ebert gave the film 3 stars out of 4, praising the film's amazing visuals but criticizing the decision to make the animals talk, which he felt canceled out the effort to make the film so realistic. Oh man, yeah, and that's the thing, right? I almost can't get mad at it because it took a really long time. I want to say it took like 10 years of having consistent CG films and 3D video games. I think it took a long time for people to realize that a realistic art style tends to age pretty poorly. Nowadays, I actually suspect that, and I think it's been like this for a while, since at least some examples from like the PS3 generation, I think that nowadays we've sort of hit a level where I genuinely don't think the stuff that's coming out now is going to age poorly, that is trying to be photorealistic. I was watching Prox play Payday, like the original Payday from like 2011, and that game looks pretty good. There's a couple things you can see, like some like flat textures where maybe today they would use some more complex like bump maps to give something the impression of depth and stuff like that. But overall, that is still a pretty good looking game and not terribly high budget either. But it is like, I think, a pretty common sentiment at this point that when you try to go for a photoreal art style, it ends up getting obliterated in a matter of years. This is why Pixar... I don't know if this was intentional. If it was, it's very smart. I think it's really smart that Pixar started off with Toy Story. Because you look at Toy Story, and even today, I think visually it's aged pretty well. With the notable exception of the human beings, which look freaky, and looked freaky, I remember when I was a kid, not, like, watching the movie at like 10 years old, I was like, these humans look a little funky. that dog looks a little funky. And it's like, yeah, having the foresight to make all of your characters toys that don't have to look realistic and can look kind of plasticky, and you can sort of stylize a little bit, ends up working really well when you don't have the means for really high fidelity textures or lighting effects. It holds up pretty well. And most of their early thing, like, Pixar did not want to do things with human characters in it for a while until The Incredibles, at which point they realized, oh, shocker, to make appealing looking characters in 3D, you actually just use the same principles that you use to make appealing looking characters in two-dimensional artwork. You just stylize it a bit and give them recognizable, clear, shapes and stuff like that. And you don't try to go so realistic. Nowadays you could probably go like more realistic, but you know what I mean, right? I can't fault them for going for realism in this, because I can imagine a point in time where this movie came out and it was extremely impressive. I mean, just looking at the review section, it seems like this was pretty cutting edge, and I can believe that. But yeah, I can't fault them for it, but it has not aged well. It is aged extremely poorly, in fact. And there's a reason you barely ever hear anyone talk about it. Because it's boring. The Los Angeles Times review. A technical astonishes and disheartens as only the most elaborate, most ambitious Hollywood products can. A technical amazement that points computer-generated animation towards the brightest of futures. It's also cartoonish in the worst way, the prisoner of pedestrian plot points and childish too-cute dialogue. There's a review from Variety. An eye-popping spectacle later wrote, somewhere around halfway through, you begin to get used to the film's pictorial wondrousness, to take it for granted even, and start to realize that the characters and story are exceedingly mundane, unsurprising, and pre-programmed. Yeah, yeah. The one reason to see this was that it was cool looking in 2000. And then I looked at the writing credits, and let's see. So it was directed by a guy named Eric Leighton, who also did actually kind of interesting Owls of Ga'Hoole and The Nightmare Before Christmas. He was like an animation director on it. Or animation department, I won't say director. He was on King Kong. He later worked on Mad God. That's kind of funny. Like Anomalisa, Coraline, he was a lead animator on it. James and the Giant Peach, he was an animation supervisor. Like, he's actually fairly accomplished in the world of animation. I wonder if it's just that, like, the constraints of the film and the decision to make it the scenes live action and to be using a relatively new technology that a lot of people weren't comfortable with at the time kind of hindered what he was able to do. I wonder if this would have been a much more interesting movie if it was entirely CGI or entirely animated, or at least largely stop motion with like sets and stuff like Nightmare Before Christmas, a movie that he worked on in the animation department that is visually very interesting. I wonder. And then the writer of the film is a fella named Ralph Zondag, who only wrote one other movie, that being Pocahontas. And then I looked at the writing credits for Pocahontas. Holy shit. There are so many writing credits. It is no wonder this movie was a fucking disaster. Let me just count off the writing credits. So there's 3 written by credits, right? 3. And then a bunch of story by credits as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There are 12 story by credits to Pocahontas. And then additional story development, of which there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There's 11, 23, 26 total writing credits for Pocahontas across everything. No wonder that movie's just a complete disaster. Just holy shit, it makes so much sense looking at it now. That it is such a weird, all over the place, vaguely insensitive, weird picture. Christ. So yeah, I can't blame Ralph Zondag entirely for Pocahontas. Do they have any Native American people working on it? I don't see anyone. I don't see any names that strike me as being particularly native looking. Yeah. Well, yeah, Dinosaur sucks ass. You know what doesn't suck ass? And came out a year later? Black Knight from 2001. So, starring Martin Lawrence. So, a while back, Kat watched this movie on her own, and she referenced it to me, and she said it's a movie about Martin Lawrence going back in time to medieval England and becoming a knight, and it's a comedy. And I said, that sounds fucking awesome. Because I think she explicitly pitched it as like, it's like a knight from the hood. And I was like, that sounds great. And as something to soften the blow of watching Dinosaur, she put on Black Knight as a surprise for me afterwards, because she's so thoughtful like that. I was so excited, because we've been referencing this movie, just like randomly, just referencing the Black Knight. And we finally watched it. So, Black Knight, it's not a good movie, but it is a great movie. It's extremely pure in what it is, which I find interesting. I don't know if it succeeds in anything besides... I don't know why I love this movie so much. I think I just find it extremely amusing that it exists. It's kind of like a court jester. It's not particularly funny. I don't think I ever laughed at anything intentionally that the movie tried to do. The performances are acceptable. The story is not the most interesting thing in the world. It's just kind of a lovable movie. So, Black Knight is, I would describe it as being the first black savior movie, potentially a black supremacist movie. Essentially, Martin Lawrence is working as a theme park guy he's working at a theme park. It's a medieval theme park, medieval themed amusement park. What you do? And he falls into he sees a little glowing amulet in the moat. This like ratty, dirty moat that's around the theme park. And he goes to reach in for this amulet. He falls in. And he wakes up in medieval Europe in the year like 1312 or something like that. And he spends like a good chunk of the movie not believing... I don't know like what he thinks has happened, because he fell into the water, and then he's here, right? He's in like, he washes up outside of a lake, and he just kind of acts like this is normal, and he's just somewhere. I don't know like what the fuck he thinks or why, but it's entirely to have the first chunk of the movie, like the whole first act, be the gag that he doesn't realize he's time traveled. So he's walking around talking to people, and excuse me. And he goes to like the castle of England, I guess. And they let him in because he tells them that he's from Normandy, which I believe is like a suburb in Los Angeles or something. But they think he's from Normandy, France, and that he's a messenger because the king's daughter is going to be wed to the Duke of Normandy. So they think that he's heralding the Duke's arrival. So they let him in, and then Martin Lawrence just kind of like accidentally bullshits his way into being like working his way into the royal court. Then there's a scene where they ask him if he knows how to dance at like a banquet, and he invents funk music for them. He invents soul and R&B, and they have a big dance sequence. This whole movie is just about how awesome black people are, and it rules. It's so great. And I say black savior. It literally is these stupid backwater white people from the medieval times are stodgy, and they need this black dude to come in and save them and to give them real culture, and to show them like the way, because there's this whole plot line that the movie ends up being about the trying to reinstate the deposed queen or whatever. I don't think any of this is historical. And like Martin Lawrence, there's this legend of the Black Knight, and Martin Lawrence becomes the Black Knight, figuratively and literally. So he's it's literally just this black dude shows up and shows these white people what's what, and it's great. I love it. It's so funny. Like it's like, I don't know how much of my enjoyment of this movie is ironic and how much of it is like because it's enjoyable at all. Because again, it's not funny. There's so like, yeah, he's there. He ends up getting involved in the court. He's sort of like bumbling his way around this castle, and then there's like one black lady in the movie, and I was like, okay, that's the love interest. And yes, she absolutely becomes his love interest. It's so funny. They call him a Moor, which I don't know. I found that really funny. I guess they would have maybe called him a Moor back then. I'm not sure. I guess maybe they would have assumed. But yeah, it's this. And then there's a plot point where he gets disgraced because after he shows them real culture and boogie, the princess, the king's daughter, is super into him, and she sneaks into his chambers, and they have sex in the dark, so he doesn't know that it's her. He thinks that it's the black lady. And when he wakes up, it's literally like the scene from Berserk where Griffith sleeps with the princess. And it's like dude, the whole movie, like, I swear to God, this is just like a flip. Like, he comes in, he shows them real culture, he saves their people. Race mixing is evil. It's just like, this is a black supremacist, black separatist movie, and I entirely unintentionally, and I kind of love it for that. Do I have literally anything else to say about the Black Knight? Oh, it has a bizarre ending. It has a weird ending. Uh, so he goes through this whole quest. He becomes a knight. He like learns a lesson, I suppose, and about like helping people out and inspiring people. Oh, there's an awesome scene. I think the one thing I laughed at because it was so bizarre and out of character. The film has a very safe sense of humor for the most part. Like it's like the lightest, most family friendly kind of raunchy that you could ever imagine. And then randomly there's like this scene where he's trying to inspire these people to rally them to battle. And he goes like, once there was a king. And I'm like, all right, yeah, okay. He's going to talk about, and he goes, Rodney King. And I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. What the fuck? I wasn't expecting a Rodney King. And he's like, and he said, can't we just get along? And then he like imitates Rodney King getting beat up. I'm like, I wasn't expecting this movie to veer into like a fucking Rodney King police brutality race riots reference. Like, that was strange. That was like really out of left field. So he learned his lesson and he's going about being like a good person, or he just has to like step up and take responsibility and all that. He becomes a hero, and then he's being knighted. They're about to go back in time. He's going to take his lady back to the present day, and they're at the lake where they're going to jump back in. Then he gets knighted. And the queen who's knighting him says, like, clear. And I'm like, oh, God, no, don't. And then he wakes up, and the whole movie is a dream. The whole fucking movie is he's in a coma. That's the twist at the end. Which feels completely unnecessary. It's just, like, it doesn't, like, it's completely unnecessary to do that. But then he, like, goes to the theme park. And he gives like his boss some advice, and then they start, the business starts coming back, and then one day he's doing his thing, and he sees her. He sees, it's obviously the same actress, but it's like, and she has like a really similar name. She was like Victoria, aka Vicky, in the past, in the medieval period, and now he meets Nikki, and he's like, oh, and like they recognize each other from somewhere, and it's like, oh, was there like a reality to it? And he like realizes that he forgot to ask her for her number, so he's running out of the park, and then he trips and he falls back into the moat. And in the last 10 seconds of the movie, I swear to God, the last 10 seconds of this movie are him waking up in the Colosseum, the gladiatorial Colosseum, and screaming, and a lion is let loose on him, and it's like the worst green screen effect ever. It's the last 10 seconds of the movie, and then it cuts to credits. It's fucking so weird. It's so bizarre they chose to end the movie like that. Like, it stops giving a fuck about whatever internal logic was the time travel. Like, it just stops caring. And it's fine. I don't care. And honestly, that redeemed it for me. The Black Knight, it's a 10 out of 10. It's a 10 out of 10. It's a 10 out of 10. And with that, I want to cut it short because I want to get back to editing my video. And yeah. Anyway, thank you everybody so much for listening this far. If you've been listening this far, thank you for listening to me ramble. If you have a question, feel free to leave it down in the comments below, but please phrase it in the form of a question, because I'm not just going to read your thoughts out loud. Video soon. It's taken a long fucking time. It's a long-ass video. I think I hit a bit of a stride with it. I think there's parts of the video that are harder to edit. There's ones that are easier to edit. I mean, you probably don't know that if you haven't like made them before, but like some things just take a while. I think I'm at a point where the rest of the video is going to be relatively easy to put together. So I'm hoping the progress is going to pick up on there. But anyway, it's been real. Go check out The Black Knight from 2001 with Martin Lawrence. Goodbye.